Thank you for the invitation to speak to the Australian and New Zealand College of Veterinary Science on the topic of curb bits and nosebands. My presentation includes images of dressage horses, but I want to be clear that the problems that bits and nosebands create for horses are similar, regardless of sporting discipline. For my PhD at the University of New England, I'm researching the One Welfare outcomes of human-horse interactions. As you know, One Welfare recognizes that the welfare of humans, animals, and the environment is interdependent. And I want to thank my team, my supervisors, Amy Likens, Melanie Filios, and Kath Henschel, and my academic mentors, David Mellor and Paul McGreevy. As is usual when embarking on a PhD, when I first started, I immersed myself in the literature and began conceptualizing and developing my ideas, which led to the publication of the teleonome, which I'll be referring to in this presentation. But in the progress, something derailed our attention. In April 2024, images of dressage horses with blue or cyanotic tongues exploded across mainstream media. First were taken at the Amsterdam World Cup event by fine art photographer Crispin Parelius Johannessen. Paul McGreevy, alongside Dr. Kati Tuomola, a Finnish veterinarian with a PhD on bit-induced oral lesions, provided comment, and the news went viral. The media attention and polarization of opinions was extreme, and from within the sport, the first response was to discredit the photos, claiming they were digitally manipulated or isolated and unfortunate moments in time. But I know the photographer Crispin. Personally and professionally, his work is meticulous, high quality, and trustworthy. So we invited Crispin and Kati to join our research team to help us explore this issue. And we began looking at Crispin's images by the thousands. Crispin has spent decades perfecting the art of capturing the detail of horses in action, exploring how they're represented in images and art. He uses state-of-the-art equipment that takes up to 120 frames per second in ultra-high definition. He photographs what the industry calls the field of play. So all the photos you will see today were captured in a public international competition arena, in front of enthusiastic crowd, judges, officials, including veterinarians, coaches, trainers, and riders, of course. He photographs the Grand Prix, the highest level in the sport, and he photographs every horse from the moment they enter the arena to the time they depart, collecting between 8,000 and 10,000 images per horse rider combination. You may ask why he does not take video instead, and it's because of the resolution. Even with HD video, each frame is slightly blurry. Plus, by taking so many images, they can be stitched together like the first movies were to animate them. He mostly focuses on the horse's head and mouth, but also captures other parts of the rider, like the legs and spurs. So we instantly recognized that Crispin's images are a very powerful, convenient sample. It clearly shows something that's been hiding in plain sight, that all the equipment we use on the horse's head is specifically designed to apply and manipulate pressure. These images show the obvious, which is that the forces that bits and nosebands can and often do apply exceed the biological limits of the tissues affected. From a One Welfare perspective, what's interesting is that this is happening in an Olympic sport that is also regulated by national federations and the International Equestrian Federation, the FEI, whose central principle is that the horse's welfare is paramount. Plus, this is a sporting discipline that claims total harmony between horse and rider as the aim. The FEI rules state that the most important task for the judge is to keep the welfare of the horse in mind, that they must pay special attention to all signs of discomfort and penalize them significantly. This monitoring for pain signs is clearly not happening in dressage, not by the judges or the veterinarians. There is research on the cognitive challenges that dressage judges face. And if identifying signs of pain is their most important task, either we're setting them with an impossible task or they're not seeing the horse in the way we do. So now we have a whole heap of research questions that we're exploring as part of my project. And regarding one, welfare, public concern for horse welfare is certainly threatening the social license to use horses in sport and dividing communities. And there are clearly some interesting research questions about the impact this has on humans. I mentioned yesterday how the systemic currents that develop within communities can lead us to behave in ways that don't match our ideals. So what's happening with the dressage community could well be an example of cognitive dissonance reduction by dissociation, normalizing, and other moral disengagement strategies. If you're interested, I can recommend this paper by Erica Chung, Danny Mills, and Bethan Ventura, which has just been published. But today I'm going to walk yesterday's talk. Yesterday I presented on the 6 A's that operationalize the teleonome. And today I'm going to be considering these 6 A's in relation to equipment used on the horse's head to infer what's going on for these dressage horses in welfare terms. So we start with the evolutionary and genetic baseline. Horses are preyed upon, highly social herbivores. More specifically, they are hindgut fermenters. So the equine digestive system evolved over millions of years. Form, function, and ecology influenced each other, and the horse found a nutritional niche in the temperate open plains. So by ingesting and digesting the high fiber and lower energy grasses and browse which ruminants tend to ignore, they had less competition. However, they're large and heavy animals, and to get enough nutrition from this low-quality forage, they have to spend many hours of the day trickle feeding in the open, which leaves them vulnerable to predators. So to reduce the predators' chances of success, they form a group that sticks together and shares the vigilance tasks. They are, of course, very athletic. They immediately detect alert behaviors in other horses, and they're always ready to move away explosively if they feel they have to, increasing the distance from what raised the alarm. These aspects of the horse's natural history explain why we talk about the 3 F's, friends, forage, and freedom, as fundamental needs for horses. But the teleonome is also why Kath Henschel, Paul McGreevy, and I are proposing a 4th F, the mothership of those 3, which is feeling safe. You could say that a fundamental goal or telos of horses is to eat and avoid being eaten. And for that they need space and conspecific. The equine form and function seems to be in the Goldilocks zone for extending human capabilities. They are faster and stronger than us, and they can cover great distances in much shorter time. They don't migrate. Foals can follow from day one. Their back evolved to carry the huge and heavy cecum, as well as a full-term foal, so without the foal they can carry humans on their backs and remain mostly just as athletic. But when we're on the horse's back, our own human teleonome is tickled. We feel amazing as long as we feel safe enough, and I think that's what makes horse riding so addictive and so enjoyable. So the equine teleonome seems to be in this Goldilocks zone, not too small, not too large, not too slow, but not too fast either. And they have this long head, which evolved to allow them to see over the pasture sward without having to stop feeding. So they can eat and not get eaten. And don't forget the long neck, longer than an elephant or a cow, which, by the way, we can also ride, but not as long as a camel or a giraffe. It's just right for their own agentic pursuit of the 4 F's, of course, but also for our human goals. So we've been exploiting the horse's teleonome for several millennia. The jury's out as to when we started exactly, but it had something to do with the development of certain technologies, particularly the fence and the bitted bridle, which already tells us something. So horses have evolved to use their head and neck to feed, socialize, and to resist or avoid predator attacks, and they're much stronger than we are. But we humans have an advantage, technologies that can disable their power and prevent their escape attempts. So controlling the head and neck is how we have and we continue to harness their movement. But let's move on to the next A, Adaptation. Part of the horse's teleonome includes tremendous behavioral flexibility, which is why many horses survive human imposed situations that are so far removed from their natural history. Using fences, ropes, and bridles, the human teleonome can exploit their inherited behavioral flexibility and the teleonomic priority to stay safe. And we do this mainly using operant conditioning, particularly negative reinforcement, which can be conceptualized using the same regulatory cycle that we explore in the teleonome, because learning is adaptation. So yesterday, Kath Henshaw spoke about prediction errors in relation to the negative reinforcement adaptive cycle, and I'm going to run through this at a more simplistic theoretical level. In this case, the homeostatic or bioregulatory operational range is a pressure and pain-free zone, the comfort zone for the tissues that lie underneath the equipment. So pulling on the bit compresses the tissues or stretches the lips, presses on the bars, the tongue, and the teeth. All are extremely sensitive, and therefore they're activating nociceptors. The change is evaluated as a threat. It signals potential tissue damage that needs to be resolved. The horse then forecasts and has to pick the most adaptive response, the response that's going to resolve the challenge. From the teleonome's perspective, from the survival perspective, the most obvious is to get away, and this is why rearing behaviors are so iconic in horses. But let's say the handler or rider maintains the pressure or escalates it while the horse tries new responses, simply because they seem adaptive to the teleonome. At some point, they may try slowing down the legs, and if the rider is quick enough to release the reins, bingo, the threat is resolved. The horse then, at least in theory, computes that this response to oral pain is the most adaptive, and they update their memory or priors. With a bit of luck, the horse remembers which response resolves the threat next time, so the release happens earlier. They spend less time in pain. And so in equitation science, this has been conceptualized as the please, do it, thank you cycle. So again, in theory, to make training horses more humane, more ethical, a trainer should classically condition a light cue before applying a pressure, for example, a whoa. If the cue is conditioned well, the teleonome will detect the light cue and almost automatically respond correctly. The horse can then avoid the bit pressure altogether. The teleonome as a system is primed for this type of anticipatory regulation because it is so efficient. And in equitation science, this is the holy grail, and it is known as training for self-carriage. However, in equitation, not using pressure is not common. Sometimes the pressure is just swapped to a different area, hopefully causing less pressure. And bridle-free riding is an example that is becoming very popular, where the rider operates a collar instead of a bridle, and of course they also have their legs. Bridle-free riding requires much better training skills and very careful management of the horse's affective state and level of arousal. And these horses generally avoid painful pressures being applied to their heads and mouths. But of course, the human teleonome loves a shortcut and is already marketing it. This is the TAC collar, which is available online for $125. What we see in the data repository that Crispin is collecting is that self-carriage and pain-free and pressure-free periods are very uncommon in elite dressage. We now have hundreds of thousands of images that can be stitched together to prove that these are not moments in time. On the contrary, what's rare is to photograph a meaningful rein release, which makes sense because the dressage rules stipulate that visible rein pressures visible rain releases, more precisely, should be penalized by the judges. So moving to affordances, the next A, these are the opportunities for resolving and for pursuing teleonomic needs. Here it is interesting to think of the head and neck as a teleonomic affordance. For the horse, it plays a role in foraging, drinking, and social interactions, all of which are survival critical. But biomechanically, the weight of the head and the muscularity of the neck mean that deliberately changing its position will affect the horse's balance, the center of mass, and their ability to move. Horses use this very effectively to protect themselves and escape from situations that their teleonome evaluates as threatening, which is why humans need control over it. Leverage afforded to the human through controlling head height and bending the neck of a horse of any size is demonstrated by the recommended technique for restraining a recumbent horse. A light-framed person can safely and efficiently prevent a horse from attempting to rise by keeping the neck down and tilting the nose upward. But of course, controlling neck flexion can also influence and channel the horse's locomotion. In fact, neck flexions are central in horsemanship teachings that have persisted through millennia. The most blunt modern example is in natural horsemanship, where they describe neck flexions and one-rein stops as useful for preventing the brace, to disengage the hindquarters, and as a technique for installing emergency brakes, or like this one, for controlling a horse about to get up to no good. And although horsemanship manuals, ancient and modern, devote extraordinary attention to training neck flexions, to go from the please to the thank you without the stronger pressures, and the stated aim is for the rider to achieve self-carriage, riders can and always rely on the equipment to make the horse do it. In other words, the do it partly relies on mechanical forces applied to sensitive tissues. Horse gear catalogs are full of bridles and bits of various designs, each sold according to its action and with the rider's and not the horse's goals or telos in mind. In many disciplines, the rules governing the types of mechanical devices that can be used on horses' heads prioritizes the rider's control goals and not the horse's risk management ones. Again, the one who controls the head and neck is the one controlling the interaction. So we move on to the next A, affect, to see how this is experienced by horses. And when we apply the International Association for the Study of Pain's definition of pain, pain is the parsimonious hypothesis here. In relation to the teleonome, pain is an evolved signal that protects the body from injury. It's a viability threat signal, and it is unpleasant by design because it has to be salient enough to motivate and prioritize protective action. Pain can range from mild pain, which may signal the risk of tissue damage, to severe, excruciating pain, indicating significant or survival-threatening injury. Professor Emeritus David Mello and his colleagues at Massey University spent 3 decades researching painful husbandry procedures in animals. The literature is very, very well established. Triggers that would elicit mouth pain in horses include compression and stretching of the tissues, but also constriction of the nerves and blood vessels, and of course cutting. And there's a high prevalence of bit-induced mouth lesions in horses that is being documented by researchers. So in our photo data sets, we definitely see stretching, and where the lips part, we can see severe compression of the tongue and bars. And we can see oral lesions, which would be hypersensitized areas still being exposed to compression and stretching forces. And we can infer this musculoskeletal pain and air hunger from the very hyperflexed neck postures. But of course, we see many cyanotic tongues. The degree of compression of what is a highly innervated and vascularized muscular hydrostat means there's little doubt that the forces being applied are acting as a tourniquet on the tongue. And of course, from the medical literature, we know that tourniquet pain is excruciating. Which brings me to focus on the curb bit, which is one of two in the double bridle, a bitting arrangement that is compulsory at the FEI level of competition. And I'm going to be focusing only on the curb bit and its mechanical action. The key to a curb bit is the curb chain, which hooks on each side of the bit and wraps around the mandible at the chin groove. This test helped me understand why we see such high compression of the tongues. This is on my leg. So bits with curb chains, by virtue of the mechanical design, trap and compress the tongue between the mouthpiece and the bars of the mandible. They act in a similar way to a nutcracker. The lever design affords the rider a mechanical advantage. In this case, in the case of this particular bit, more or less one unit of force from the rider's perspective becomes 4 units of force applied on the oral tissues. So here's an illustration. When there is no rein tension, when the rider is not pulling or trying to keep a contact, the bit shank will line up with the headpiece and the lips, and the curb chain will be slack. When you apply rein tension, or the horse applies it for himself by pushing the nose forward, the curb shank and the mouthpiece swings caudally, moves closer to the rider, and the curb chain comes into tension. You can also see here how the curb bit trains horses to overbend, also known as hyperflexion or roll curve. If negative reinforcement was being applied to train this type of flexion, then the rein and the chain would go slack when the desired angle was achieved. However, this is not what we see in the competition arena. Regardless how much they hyperflex, the rein tension is maintained. According to the dressage manual, overbending should be penalized. It is in the judging rules, but this is a very successful horse rider combination, and these images were taken during a performance where they did really well. Moving on to the next A, in terms of allostatic costs, these are the costs of adaptation. This type of riding causes pain and is placing a large number of body systems and tissues under strain. And where researchers are given access to properly conduct oral checks, usually after the performance, they find a high prevalence of lesions, and they've also found horses competing without being given appropriate time to heal. So population level studies tracking composite biomarkers of allostatic load in horses used for different pursuits would give us much needed information here. From a teleonomic perspective, agency is the meta-affordance. It's the capacity to act on the world and to produce outcomes that matter to you. Clearly, the riders are meeting their sporting telos, they are meeting their competitive goals, but for the horse, every attempt to resolve the forces that are stretching, compressing, and constricting oral tissues, that are either shortening the neck, opening the mouth, shifting the tongue, are mechanically blocked by the noseband and produce no release. And when nothing the horse does changes the outcome for them, the options collapse from resolving to enduring, and that is the opposite of harmony that the sport claims to be showcasing. These two images are close in time. Salience, in terms of salience, the spur pressure is intermittent and therefore it is escapable from the horse's perspective. But bit pressure is constant and isn't. So the horse is going to prioritize the cue they can act on, which is the spurs. This is where the prediction error work, and the idea that a horse who learns that pressure is inescapable stops trying to escape that pressure comes in handy, and is showcased by the work that Kath Henshaw is doing to rethink how operant conditioning actually works in horses. And of course, there's this caveat that although some horses continue to perform successfully in these conditions, some do not, and they display easy to observe indicators of negative welfare, like refusing to go forward, like rearing, bucking, and other behaviors that we consider undesirable. So the absence of rearing or balking in the horses who keep winning is not evidence that pain and fear are absent. So finally, the goal of any welfare assessment is to infer the horse's subjective experience, the effective trajectory the dressage horse is on, positive experiences that dressage horses enjoy in what's known as the other 23 hours, that is, if they have friends, freedom, and forage opportunities that are plentifully available, are of course important and meaningful to them, but they do not compensate for the daily training sessions. The low expectation of control, the capacity to protect the body from actual or potential tissue damage, is the pivotal variable. Across species, including horses, failure to escape an aversive stimulus produces more fear, pain, and impairs learning. It creates a negativity bias that is well documented. So the trajectory here isn't a training snapshot. Repeated inescapable pressures, day in, day out, bend it downwards over a season and a career. Thank you.